Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Arun Ghosh and I'm from MCIS, and here is my awesome student Sushant Chhetry, and today he will present a literature survey on this topic, and this is an ongoing research. So now let's hear from Sushant. Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for introducing me. As he mentioned, this is my preliminary results on a literature survey on the effects of time spent playing video games on teens' psychological and social development. So today I'm going to talk about the introduction, the background, the methodology that I used, the findings, the preliminary findings, any future research recommendation, and finally some conclusions. So a bit about the study, the literature review itself. It is a work on recent research work for mental health on adolescents and video games. So it summarizes all the key findings and identifies any possible gaps in the studies. It also the objective of this is to broaden the general public view on effects of video games when it comes to teenagers, because a lot of the video games issue is usually trivialized or has a false prejudice related to it. And I want this literature review to provide an informative approach when it comes to understanding all the effects. So the research questions that were asked during the analysis phase are: which aspects of video games' effect on teenagers are currently being researched in the field? What is the current trend and statistics on video games among teenagers? How does the research develop an understanding of the subject of video games on effects on teenagers, psychological and social development? So a little background on the field itself. So you guys might be wondering, what is a video game? So a video game is an interactive media where progression is based on a correct input by the user. The user are usually called video gamers. And video game is very rising in popularity, and right now it is caught up, but that is 2.7 billion gamers worldwide. The expected video game industry was worth to be $159.3 billion in 2020. And during COVID-19 itself, there was a 31% surge in the increase in video game subscription and purchases. So video games is usually generalized, however, it is very diverse depending on factors such as connectivity, complexity, and genre itself. Just looking at the conceptual map provided by the study by Granick, Lobel, and Engels, it shows us two dimensions: the complexity and the social aspect of video games. And just looking at it itself, there are a lot of diverse games. For example, a role-playing game such as Final Fantasy has a complex and non-social aspect compared to a Mario Party, which is a party game, which has more social and is more simple. So you can understand that the effects might vary depending on the dimensions. There are a lot of psychological and social effects when it comes to video games, more on teenagers, and it is very crucial to understand the effects on teenagers because they are developing new patterns and ways to deal with social issues, emotional issues, and they have their peer network nowadays in online video games. So a lot of past research is done on negative effects, so understanding every overview of the effects is very important. So the methodology that was used during the literature review is a very systematic approach with two phases, the first being the literature search and the second being citation cross-reference. For the literature search, I used databases such as Google Scholar and ACM Digital Library, and the search was limited to keywords such as teenagers, adolescents, video games, computer games, mobile games, mental health, psychological development, and social development. After the literature was collected, there was another iteration where the citations were used to find additional relevant articles. The inclusion criteria for the literatures must be published between 2012 and 2022, should be focused on video games and mental health, should involve some aspects of teens' psychological and or social development, and should include some aspects of teenage usage of video games itself. So a total of 37 articles were uncovered, and they were analyzed based on a structured codebook. So the findings of my analysis are, first of all, teenagers and video games itself. So 50% of all the American teens were reported to spend time playing video games with their friends. The communication, the video game is used as a communication platform by adolescent boys more than adolescent girls, and twice as many parents reported their teen boys playing video games every day than the parents of teen girls. The other interesting aspect was 54% of teens were reported by parents to play video games for more than 3 hours. And however, only 1 in 5 parents say that their teens don't play video games. The other theme was violent video games itself. The field is hugely covered when it comes to the negative effect of violent video games. According to Lobel, Engelstone, Burke, and Granick, out of 101 studies that were investigated on the effects of violent video games on adolescent psychosocial health, 70 of them were assessing externalizing problems such as aggression. The research findings itself are very inconsistent, with some research suggesting that violent video game desensitizes violence, while the others suggesting that there is no effect when it comes to violent video games. All the past researches are very cross-sectional in nature, and their findings are very correlative. However, in recent days, there is an increase in new research suggesting new methods and kind of criticizing the past research. Even the American Psychological Association reaffirmed its position on violent video games. The resolution was made on 2015, and the new resolution of 2020 states that there is a small and reliable relation between the behavior of yelling and pushing among teenagers. However, the research findings cannot be extended to complex violent outcomes such as mass shootings. So the psychological and social effects itself, it is based on cognitive, social, emotional, and motivational effects. All of these are based on factors such as the video game's genre and frequency itself. For example, spatial awareness and effective attentional resource allocation was found more when it came to genres like shooter video games. For example, improved mood and heightened positive emotions was found between games with high-paced, simple UI puzzle games. And for example, the gaming frequency was related with an increase in internalizing problems such as anxiety, compulsion disorder, and more. The competitive games didn't have any effect unless the players played more than 8 hours of video games, which was related with a decrease in pro-social activity. Per week, not per day, per week. Violent video games did not have any externalizing problems, there was no increase in externalizing problems, nor decrease in pro-social activity. And finally, there was no link between gaming and changes in hyperactivity and inattention. So, based on this, the future research recommendations are that it should emphasize both positive and the negative effect when it's doing its study. There should be more longitudinal studies to study about the long-term effect of video games, and a different approach should be taken depending on the genres when it comes to video games. Finally, research should focus on internalizing problems as well, instead of focusing more on aggression. So, in conclusion, video games are developing rapidly, and it is integrating very simultaneously, as we can see ourselves. It is very crucial to understand the psychosocial effects of video games on general public as well as teens itself. So to understand the broader overview, understanding both positive and negative effect gives us a knowledgeable, informative approach when it comes to the development of teens. So teen boys spend more time playing video games, so parents can, after knowing this informative approach, can take certain steps accordingly. And the effect of video games depends on genre and frequency, so the study should be done accordingly. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Ghosh for helping me throughout this research and the presentation. I'd like to thank JSU MCIS department, JSU College of Science and Mathematics, and I want to thank y'all for attending my presentation. These are my citations, and I'd like to open up the floor for any questions, comments, or suggestions.
I have a question. In your research, was there, what I'm interested in is culture. Like in the U.S., are U.S. teens more likely to be violent because of our culture about guns than, say, European teens? I mean, in those shooter games, I wonder if our acceptance of guns influences that aggression?
There was a paper which included a sampling. The paper actually criticizes the sampling of violent video game studies, where a lot of it was very not diverse. It focused on just small groups with past aggression issues or past cultural issues. So another future recommendation should be done is that the population sampling should be more diverse when it comes to understanding violence in video games.
We got time for maybe one more question. All right, let's thank our speaker.
All right, thank you.